That is the point. So that we have to do all kinds of things now. And the main thing to do is to deal with this carbon budget. I come back to the beginning of the thing. Look at the figures. We know we've got 360 gigatons of carbon we can, as it were, emit before we reach the danger level of not being able to get to the
more
the 1.5.
CO2, the better.
That's it. So we've got the carbon budget, and we know we've got to get there. So it actually means that countries need to divvy up this carbon budget between them, and then they need to divvy up the sectors, and then they need to have the measures which deal sector by sector with getting the. And if that means actually some of us are told, well, you can't go on a plane, that's fine. That's part of the national plan.
You're trying to mug me off.
Well, you can't go on a plane. That's fine. That's part of the national plan.
Well, you can't go on a plane. That's fine. That's part of the national plan.
I don't fucking believe it. You better believe it, because it's fucking happening.
Now guys, I just have to ask you if any of you's ever agreed to this national plan. Me personally, I have not, and in fact have stood against the net zero plan from the moment I noticed it was happening. This, like the never-ending migrant invasion on our south coast, is something no one voted for and is actually against the interests of the general public in literally every way. In that there though, you did hear the talk of a carbon budget and how it needs to be divided up. This means carbon credit scores and all that, which is something we knew they wanted, and that's how it's all gonna start. First countries are given carbon credit scores and then it's forced on us, the plebs. This won't just stop you flying, but will also stop you driving them more. They know, as we all do, that there's not enough raw materials to replace all cars with electric ones, and so carbon credit scores will keep you out of using them. This is actually brought up during this interview itself. Take a quick look.
But actually, that's not. We need to have oil and gas until we could get to that point. And even then, electricity isn't very good for running cars. For a start, there's not enough minerals in the world to make all the electric cars to replace all the ICE vehicles, and it's not efficient in heating your home as well.
So there you see her point out how there ain't enough minerals to make the required cars, which he ignores because obviously he knows she's right. He just can't tell the public they're going to be banned from driving yet. Clearly it's a little different with the planes. Him admitting they plan to stop people flying was either at this point the paid-for puppets saying too much, or the fact that they just don't care if we know that part of the plan.
Because it's all part of the plan.
This didn't stop there though, because he also gave away a few other things they plan to do in this, and GB News didn't exactly come out smelling of roses either. So you know what, let's go through a couple more clips before I end this video.
Well, I thought that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's statement in Parliament a couple of days ago, I think it was on November the 9th, he did set out, a fairly clear position as far as the UK government is concerned, that we do have a legally binding target about reaching net zero by, I think, the year 2050. We have some legally binding targets about the restoration of nature.
Yep, there you hear it. For those who don't know, the government has legally binding targets to push agendas that will make the general public poorer and obviously less free. Some will ask who makes these legally binding targets we have to follow, but to be honest, none of them are legally binding. A rule of UK government is that no law can be passed which a future government cannot end. Parliament, as they say, is sovereign, so there are no legally binding anything, as politicians could remove it if they wanted to. The same is true for every and any law that's ever been made in this country or even in the EU or elsewhere. Politicians choose to ignore it all because they want this to happen. Anyway though, enough of debunking his bullshit there, let's move on and see another clip.
And we are, by the way, putting in money now to help the developing countries adapt to this. It's quite a chunk of money. I have a feeling it's like about £11 billion. But of course, the crucial thing, and that's what they're talking about in Sharm el-Sheikh at the moment, the crucial thing is to get much more money on the table. And the irony is that we had COVID. This country alone produced, would you believe it, £400 billion to deal with COVID. Well, the whole of the climate change deal, which was agreed way back in 2009, said we actually only need £100 billion. It's much more now, of course. So the money is there, but what is lacking, I've got to say, is the political will.
So there you see what one of the real aims of all this is. It's about money. It's always about money, and it's always your money they're talking about as well. Firstly, though, we have to give credit to Rishi Sunak and Stanley Johnson for being able to admit they're sending £11 billion abroad for net zero, just as Jeremy Hunt begins a tax and public spending rate to make up the £60 billion deficit I'm sure you've heard about by now. Talk about pissing in our pockets and telling us it's raining or what. And he even finishes up saying it needs to be more before talking about spending over the past 2 years, which he completely misrepresents, as I'm sure you noticed. He said we produced £400 billion to pay for lockdowns, jabs and all that, when the reality is we borrowed £400 billion to crash the economy and bring on the current inflation we're seeing. The cost of living crisis is not a cost of living one, it's a cost of lockdown crisis, like I've said. You can't shut down the economy and print money like they did without inflation and all that coming with it. This idiot seems to think you can just print more money without a care in the world to pay for his net zero dream, and the host didn't even bother challenging him on that. That makes her there either useless or in agreement with it all. You take your pick which one it is.
The point I'm making is actually there are things which we can reasonably do in this country. I don't think importing huge amounts of wood pellets from Canada is a sensible way of going, but there are other sensible ways. And the other thing is we don't actually have to devote have our own energy resources 100%. We never have. We don't have our own food resources 100%. Happily, we have clever people in the City of London who make a lot of money.
Untrue. We were a net exporter of energy until pretty recently, actually. We were actually exporting energy. We weren't importing hardly any energy at all.
Well, that's because we have the North Sea.
Been self-sufficient. We have been self-sufficient in the past. And we could be again if we were allowed to frack. But of course, if we're allowed to frack, then we don't have to be dependent on other countries like China and other countries like that. And there seems to be some sort of plan that we're deindustrialized and everything is made over there, including the mad, stupid wind turbine things and the solar panels that are extremely polluting and bad for the environment.
Well, there you hear some bullshit, which the woman does call out straight away, and that is the claim that we've never been energy independent. This, as you know, is a lie, and so is his claim about the food. There was a time when the UK was feeding itself, but after decades of immigration and outsourcing, that's not true now. Obviously, though, you really need to question the motives of someone who thinks relying on imported food is better than producing your own. She thoroughly trashed his fabricated nonsense in that clip, though, so let's move on, because he didn't stop there. One thing I should note here is that GB News got rid of the other guest and let this Ponce have the last word on his own, which really just tops it off.
My thoughts on this is you've got to have, in a way, an economist's approach. There's no prima facie reason why this country should be self-sufficient in energy production. You know, the terms of trade may be such, although the comparative advantage may be such that other things we can do better. Yes, we had a good couple of decades with North oil. Now we haven't got it, but there are other things we can do. We've got all our brains, the export which comes from the City of London, the technology sector. It's all there. The same thing for food. It's complete nonsense to say we need to be self-sufficient in food production and have sheep and cows going all over our landscape. No, we don't have to do that.
It's complete nonsense to say we need to be self-sufficient in food production and have sheep and cows going all over our landscape. No, we don't have to do that.
So he bangs on about energy security again, which we've covered, but the bit that matters is his claim we don't need to have food security. Yes, he actually thinks it's best not to produce your own food because he doesn't want farm animals farting around the country. This is pure insanity on so many levels. It would be shocking if he wasn't an out-and-out globalist shitweasel, obviously. It is, however, shocking that he's admitting it on TV while food prices continue to skyrocket, though. If we produced enough food in the UK, we would then be a net exporter of food. This would not only bring down food prices for us, but also make more money for the country itself. So much for taking an economist approach to it. But if this don't tell you their goals are not beneficial to our prosperity, then I really don't know what will. Hopefully, though, the public wakes up to what they plan to do, because right now they're sleepwalking us into the shitter, a bit like they did 2 years ago.